A single gunshot rang through the crisp morning air of Kearney, Nebraska, shattering the peaceful dawn of 1878 and causing Tabitha Ross to bolt upright in her bed, her heart hammering against her ribs like a frightened bird. The sound came from the direction of the bank, the same bank where she'd deposited every penny she'd earned over the past 3 years working as the town's only female physician. Tabitha flung herself from her bed, hastily pulling a robe over her nightgown. Her hands trembled as she pushed open the window shutters of her small home situated just off the town's main street. In the distance, she could see people gathering, their shouts carrying on the wind. Something was terribly wrong. By the time Tabitha had dressed and rushed to the bank, Marshal Wilkins was already there, his weathered face grim as he addressed the crowd. Behind him, the bank's front doors stood open, revealing the chaos inside. Overturned furniture, scattered papers, and the vault door wide open and clearly empty. "Ladies and gentlemen," the marshal announced, "I regret to inform you that the Kearney Savings Bank has been robbed. Mr. Edmund Fletcher, the bank manager, is missing along with the bank's funds." The words hit Tabitha like a physical blow. Edmund Fletcher, the man who had courted her for the past 6 months, who had dined at her table every Sunday, who had promised her a future together once she had saved enough to expand her medical practice. The man she had trusted with not only her heart but her entire life savings. "No," she whispered, pushing through the crowd. "There must be some mistake." Marshal Wilkins turned to her, pity evident in his eyes. "Dr. Ross, I'm afraid it's true." Fletcher cleaned out the vault sometime during the night, shot the night guard too, though thankfully not fatally. Tabitha felt the ground sway beneath her feet. "My savings. Everything I've worked for." "I'm sorry, madam," the marshal said. "From what we can tell, he's taken nearly everything. Yours and everyone else's." A heavy hand settled on Tabitha's shoulder, and she looked up into the face of Patrick Quinn, a rancher whose land bordered the northern edge of town. She knew him only in passing, a quiet man who kept to himself, except when bringing injured ranch hands to her for care. His reputation as a former Texas Ranger who'd hung up his guns to raise horses preceded him, though he rarely spoke of his past. "Dr. Ross," he said, his voice low and steady, "you treated my foreman last winter when that bronc nearly killed him. Said you wouldn't take payment until I was back on my feet." His deep blue eyes held hers. "I haven't forgotten that kindness." "Mr. Quinn," she acknowledged, trying to maintain her composure despite feeling her world crumbling around her. "This is hardly the time for Fletcher headed north," Quinn interrupted, nodding toward the bank. "Fresh tracks leading out of town. I saw them on my way in this morning." Marshal Wilkins overheard. "Now, Quinn, don't you go getting ideas. The law will handle this." Quinn's expression remained impassive, but Tabitha noticed how his jaw tightened. "With all due respect, Marshal, you're one man with a drinking problem and a lame horse. Fletcher's got at least 6 hours head start." The marshal's face flushed red. "That's not your concern, Quinn. Last thing we need is vigilante justice." Quinn tipped his hat. "Just making an observation." He turned back to Tabitha. "Dr. Ross, I'd be obliged if you'd stop by my ranch later. Got a hand with a nasty cut needs looking at." Before she could respond, he was walking away, his spurs making a soft, jingling sound with each step. Something in the way he'd looked at her, something in the deliberate way he'd mentioned the tracks, made Tabitha suspect his invitation was about more than a wounded ranch hand. That afternoon, after tending to the injured night guard at the bank, Tabitha rode out to the Quinn ranch. The sprawling property sat nestled against rolling hills, with corrals of fine horses visible from the main house. A ranch hand directed her to the barn, where she found Patrick Quinn not tending to an injured worker, but packing saddlebags. "Mr. Quinn," she said, dismounting from her mare, "I believe I was called out here under false pretenses." Quinn straightened, meeting her gaze directly. At over 6 feet tall, he towered over her, but there was nothing threatening in his stance. "I apologize for the deception, Dr. Ross, but I didn't want to speak freely in town." "And why is that?" she asked, folding her arms across her chest. "Because I'm going after Fletcher," he said simply. Tabitha blinked, caught off guard by his candor. "That's the law's responsibility." "The law won't catch him," Quinn replied, returning to his packing. "Fletcher's got too much of a lead, and he knows these territories. By the time the marshal organizes a proper posse, that thief will be in Colorado, or worse, across the border." "And what makes you qualified to hunt him down?" she challenged, though she already knew the answer from town gossip. Quinn paused, considering her for a moment. "I spent 8 years tracking men who didn't want to be found, men a lot more dangerous than your banker." "He's not my banker," Tabitha said sharply. A ghost of a smile touched Quinn's lips. "No, I don't suppose he is." He secured a rifle to his saddle. "How much did he take from you, Dr. Ross?" Tabitha hesitated, then squared her shoulders. $3,426. Every penny I've saved since coming to Kearney." Quinn whistled low. "That's a substantial sum." "It was meant for expanding my practice," she said, her voice catching despite her efforts. "For proper surgical equipment for medicines. I've been living on barely anything, saving everything I could." Quinn nodded slowly. "And the others in town, they lost similar amounts, some more, some less." The widow's fund was in that bank too, nearly $2,000 collected for women who have lost their husbands. Tabitha felt her anger rising again. Edmund knew what that money meant to this town. He knew, and he took it anyway. Quinn was silent for a moment, then said, "I'm leaving at first light tomorrow. I'll find him, Dr. Ross." "And then what?" she asked. "Will you kill him?" "No," Quinn replied, his voice hard. "I'll bring him back to face justice, along with whatever money I can recover." Tabitha studied him, trying to understand his motivation. "Why would you do this? What's in it for you?" Quinn looked away, adjusting a strap on his saddle. "Let's just say I've got experience with men who betray trust, men who take what isn't theirs." Something in his tone made Tabitha suspect there was more to his story, but she didn't press. Instead, she made a decision that surprised even herself. "I'm coming with you." Quinn's head snapped up. "That's not possible." "I wasn't asking permission, Mr. Quinn," Tabitha replied firmly. "That's my money, my future he stole. And I know Edmund how he thinks where he might go." "It's too dangerous," Quinn argued. "The trail could lead anywhere. Through Indian territory, bandit country, I've treated gunshot wounds, arrow injuries, and knife cuts," she interrupted. "I've delivered babies in mining camps and sutured wounds by campfire light. I'm not some delicate flower, Mr. Quinn." He studied her, reassessing. "Can you ride? Really ride, I mean. We might be covering 40 miles a day." "I grew up on a horse farm in Kentucky," she replied. "I can ride." "And can you shoot?" he asked, his expression serious. Tabitha hesitated only briefly. "My father taught me. I'm not a marksman, but I can handle a revolver." Quinn considered this information, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. "Be ready at dawn. Pack light, only what you can carry on your horse. Bring medical supplies, they could come in handy, and Dr. Ross." "Yes. Wear trousers if you have them. Where we're going, a dress will just slow you down." Tabitha raised an eyebrow. "I've been wearing trousers under my riding skirts since I came west, Mr. Quinn. I'm practical, if nothing else." For the first time, a genuine smile crossed his face, transforming his features and revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "I'm beginning to see that. Dawn, then." Dawn, she agreed, then turned to leave before adding, and Mr. Quinn, it's Tabitha. If we're going to be traveling together, formality seems unnecessary. He nodded. Patrick, he offered in return, though most just call me Quinn. Patrick, she repeated, testing the name. Thank you for doing this. His expression grew serious again. Don't thank me yet, Tabitha. We've got a long road ahead, and I can't promise what we'll find at the end of it. With those sobering words hanging between them, Tabitha mounted her horse and rode back toward town, her mind racing. She was about to embark on a journey that could be dangerous, possibly even foolish, with a man she barely knew. Yet somehow, the prospect of action, of pursuing justice, rather than waiting passively for it, made her feel more in control than she had since hearing that gunshot at dawn. That night, as she packed her saddlebags with medical supplies, clothing, and a few personal items, Tabitha found herself standing before the small daguerreotype of her parents. They had raised her to be independent, to pursue her dreams of medicine despite society's disapproval. What would they think of her now, chasing after a thief across the frontier with a former Texas Ranger? I have to try, she whispered to their silent images. Everything I've worked for is at stake. As promised, Tabitha arrived at Quinn's ranch just as the eastern sky was beginning to lighten. She had dressed practically in sturdy trousers, a cotton shirt, and a fitted jacket, with her hair braided and pinned tightly to her head. A wide-brimmed hat completed her outfit, shielding her face from the already brightening sun. Patrick Quinn was waiting for her, mounted on a powerful chestnut stallion. A pack horse stood nearby, loaded with supplies. He gave her an appraising look, nodding with approval at her attire and the compact way she had packed her saddlebags. "You're punctual," he observed. "Good. We've got ground to cover." "Have you learned anything more about which way he headed?" Tabitha asked, settling into her saddle. Quinn nodded. "Station master said a man matching Fletcher's description bought a ticket to Denver yesterday morning, but never boarded the train. I think he wanted to leave a false trail. So where are we headed?" "North, to start," Quinn replied, nudging his horse forward. "The tracks I saw headed that way, and there was a report of a man riding hard through Elm Creek before dawn yesterday." As they rode out of Kearney, Tabitha felt a mix of emotions: determination, anxiety, and a strange exhilaration. Behind them, the town was just beginning to wake, unaware that their doctor was riding out on a quest that might never bring back what was lost. They rode steadily through the morning, Quinn setting a brisk but sustainable pace. He was clearly experienced in long-distance tracking, conserving their horses' strength while still making good time. They spoke little, both focused on the journey ahead, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. By midday, they stopped briefly at a small creek to water the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. Tabitha's muscles were beginning to protest the prolonged riding, but she said nothing, unwilling to show any weakness. "You ride well," Quinn commented, breaking the silence. Tabitha looked up, surprised by the compliment. "Thank you, though I haven't done this kind of distance in years." He nodded. "We'll stop earlier today, let you adjust. No point wearing ourselves out on the first day." "I can keep up," she insisted. A hint of amusement crossed his face. "Never said you couldn't. But tracking's as much about endurance as speed. We need to pace ourselves." As they continued their journey, Quinn began to explain what he was looking for: disturbed earth, broken branches, fire remains. He had a tracker's eye, noticing details Tabitha would have missed entirely. "Fletcher's not trying to hide his trail yet," Quinn observed late that afternoon, kneeling to examine some tracks. "He's just trying to put distance between himself and Kearney. That'll change when he realizes he's being followed." "How would he know?" Tabitha asked. Quinn straightened. A man carrying that much stolen money will be looking over his shoulder constantly, and we're not the only ones who might come after him. By dusk, they had covered nearly 30 miles. Quinn led them to a small clearing near a stream, well hidden from the main trail. As he unsaddled the horses, Tabitha set about gathering wood for a small fire. "No fire tonight," Quinn said, stopping her. "Too visible." Tabitha frowned. "It's going to get cold." "We've got bedrolls and blankets," he replied. "And the horses will provide some warmth if we picket them close." Resigned, Tabitha helped set up their sparse camp. Quinn produced some dried beef, biscuits, and coffee he'd prepared earlier in a jar. The cold meal wasn't satisfying, but it was sustenance. As darkness settled around them, Tabitha found herself studying her companion in the fading light. Patrick Quinn was a handsome man, she had to admit. Strong-featured with a square jaw, deep-set eyes, and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. But there was a wariness to him, a guardedness that suggested he'd seen his share of hardship. "Why did you really decide to help me?" she asked suddenly. "It can't just be because I treated your foreman." Quinn was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "7 years ago, my wife and I had a small ranch near Austin. We'd saved for years to buy it. One bad season hit us hard, and we took a loan from a banker named Harland." Tabitha waited, sensing there was more to the story. When the next season was just as bad, Harland called in the loan early, said it was business, nothing personal. Quinn's voice hardened. 2 weeks later, he bought our foreclosed property for a fraction of its value. A month after that, the railroad announced a new line that would run right through that land. "He knew," Tabitha said softly. "He forced you out to profit from the railroad." Quinn nodded. "My wife, Sarah. The loss broke her. She took ill that winter, without money for a proper doctor." He trailed off, the implication clear. "I'm so sorry," Tabitha murmured, understanding now why he'd been so quick to offer his help. "You see Fletcher as another Harland. Men like that, men who use trust as a weapon, they deserve to face consequences," Quinn said simply. "And the folks of Kearney deserve their money back." The personal revelation shifted something between them, a small barrier lifting. They talked more easily after that, sharing stories of their respective journeys west. Tabitha told him about her battle to be taken seriously as a female doctor, about the professors who had tried to discourage her, and the patients who still asked for a real doctor when faced with a woman. "Yet you persisted," Quinn observed. "What choice did I have?" she replied. "It's what I was meant to do." As the night grew deeper and conversation waned, Tabitha settled into her bedroll, acutely aware of Quinn's presence just a few feet away. Despite the circumstances that had brought them together, she felt oddly safe in his company. "Get some sleep," Quinn advised. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Tabitha nodded, already feeling the pull of exhaustion. "Good night, Patrick." "Good night, Tabitha." Dawn came too quickly, the eastern sky turning from black to deep purple to fiery orange. Tabitha awoke to find Quinn already up, checking their horses and repacking supplies. She quickly refreshed herself at the stream, the cold water shocking her fully awake. They ate a quick breakfast and were on the trail again before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. Quinn seemed more focused today, his eyes constantly scanning the landscape ahead of them. By mid-morning, they had reached a small settlement, little more than a trading post and a few scattered buildings. Quinn dismounted, motioning for Tabitha to do the same. "Wait here," he instructed, heading for the trading post. Tabitha ignored the command, following him inside. The proprietor, a grizzled old man with a patch over one eye, looked up as they entered. "Don't get many visitors this time of year," he remarked, eyeing them suspiciously. Quinn approached the counter. "Looking for a man. Well-dressed, city type." Would have passed through yesterday or the day before. The old man's single eye narrowed. Might have seen someone like that. What's your interest? He's a thief, Tabitha interjected before Quinn could answer. He stole from me and half the town of Kearney. The proprietor studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Fancy fella came through yesterday morning. Paid for supplies with a $50 bill, didn't wait for change. Said he was heading to Fort McPherson on business. Quinn and Tabitha exchanged a glance. Fort McPherson was a military outpost about 40 miles northwest. Was he alone? Quinn asked. Far as I could tell, the old man replied. Though he seemed nervous, kept looking out the window while I gathered his supplies. Quinn placed a silver dollar on the counter. Thanks for the information. Outside, Tabitha couldn't contain her excitement. We're on the right track, maybe, Quinn cautioned. Or maybe he's laying another false trail. Fort McPherson is an odd destination for a man on the run. They remounted and continued northwest, following the rough trail toward the fort. The landscape was changing, becoming more rugged with rocky outcroppings and steeper hills. By late afternoon, Quinn suddenly raised his hand, signaling Tabitha to stop. He dismounted silently, moving to examine something on the ground. When he looked up, his expression was grim. 3 riders coming from the east, moving fast. Could it be a patrol from the fort? Tabitha suggested. Quinn shook his head. Army patrols ride in formation. These tracks are spread out like they're searching for something. He quickly led their horses behind a large boulder, or someone. You think they are after Fletcher too? Tabitha whispered, suddenly understanding the implication. Seems likely, Quinn replied, checking his rifle. The question is, who are they? They waited in tense silence, listening. Soon, the sound of approaching horses reached them, moving quickly, but not at a full gallop. Quinn signaled for Tabitha to stay down, then carefully peered around the boulder. 3 riders passed within 50 yards of their hiding place. Rough-looking men, heavily armed with the hard eyes of those accustomed to violence. They passed without noticing Quinn and Tabitha, continuing northwest along the trail. Once they were out of sight, Quinn let out a breath. Bounty hunters or hired guns, someone else knows about the money. How is that possible? Tabitha asked. The robbery was only 2 days ago. Telegraph wires work fast, Quinn replied grimly, and $3,000 would be worth pursuing. It was more than that, Tabitha corrected. The total was closer to $20,000, according to the bank ledger. Quinn's eyebrows rose. That explains a lot. For that kind of money, Fletcher will have every gun for hire in 3 territories on his trail. He looked at her seriously. This just got more dangerous, Tabitha. Those men won't ask questions before shooting. I'm not turning back, she said firmly. That money represents years of work for dozens of people. Quinn studied her for a moment, then nodded. Then we need to be smarter. We'll follow those men from a distance. Let them lead us to Fletcher. As they continued their journey, now more cautiously than before, Tabitha found herself increasingly impressed with Quinn's skills. He tracked the 3 riders easily, keeping enough distance to avoid detection while never losing their trail. By nightfall, he estimated they were only a few hours behind both the gunmen and, presumably, Fletcher. They made camp in a sheltered ravine, again without a fire. The night was colder than the previous one, and Tabitha found herself shivering despite her blankets. Here, Quinn said, noticing her discomfort. He unrolled an extra blanket from his pack and handed it to her. Army surplus, wool, not pretty but warm. Tabitha accepted it gratefully. Thank you, I was trying not to complain. There's a difference between complaining and freezing, he replied with a slight smile. Besides, I need my doctor in working condition. Your doctor, she echoed, raising an eyebrow. Quinn looked momentarily flustered. a reaction so at odds with his usual composure that Tabitha found it oddly endearing. "Figure of speech," he mumbled. They ate another cold meal in companionable silence, both lost in thoughts of what the next day might bring. As they prepared to sleep, Quinn suddenly said, "Tell me about him, Fletcher." Tabitha looked up, surprised by the request. "What do you want to know? Anything that might help us anticipate his moves," Quinn replied. "What kind of man is he, really?" Tabitha considered the question carefully. "Edmund is charming, educated. He came to Kearney about a year ago from St. Louis with impressive references and connections to Eastern banks." "And you two became close?" Quinn prompted gently. Tabitha felt a flush of embarrassment. "Yes, he courted me properly, dinners, walks after church. He was attentive, interested in my work. At least he seemed to be." She paused, the painful realization of his deception still fresh. "I thought he respected me as a physician, as an independent woman. Now I wonder if he was just getting close to me to gain the town's trust." "Or to gain access to your savings," Quinn added bluntly. Tabitha winced. "Yes, that's the most humiliating part. I should have seen through him." Quinn shook his head. "Con men make their living by being believable. You're not the first person to be deceived by a smooth talker, and you won't be the last." His words were meant to be comforting, but they only reinforced Tabitha's sense of foolishness. "I'm a doctor. I'm supposed to be observant to see what others miss." "We all have blind spots," Quinn said quietly, "especially when it comes to matters of the heart." The personal nature of the conversation made Tabitha uncomfortable, and she quickly redirected. "As for his habits, Edmund is meticulous, careful. He keeps a small notebook where he writes everything down, and he's particular about his appearance, always well dressed, even in a frontier town." "Not a man accustomed to roughing it, then," Quinn observed. "That could work in our favor. The wilderness has a way of challenging city men." "Don't underestimate him," Tabitha warned. "He's resourceful and intelligent." Quinn nodded, absorbing this information. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we might catch up to those men ahead of us, and we'll need to be alert." As Tabitha settled into her blankets, her mind was filled with conflicting emotions: anger at Edmund's betrayal, determination to recover what he'd stolen, and an increasing awareness of the man sleeping just a few feet away. Patrick Quinn was everything Edmund was not: straightforward, unpretentious, and genuinely honorable. It was a stark contrast that made her question how she had been so thoroughly deceived. With these thoughts swirling in her mind, Tabitha finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreaming of stolen money and men on horseback, of gunshots at dawn and a pair of steady blue eyes watching over her. They rose before dawn, moving silently through their morning routine, now familiar after only 2 days on the trail. Quinn seemed more alert than usual, his hand often resting on the grip of his revolver as they rode. "We're getting close," he explained when Tabitha questioned his tension. "Those tracks are fresher, maybe only a few hours old now." By mid-morning, Quinn suddenly reined in his horse, raising his hand for silence. He dismounted, moving ahead on foot to the crest of a small ridge. After a moment, he gestured for Tabitha to join him, but to leave the horses. Crouching beside him at the ridge top, Tabitha looked down into a small valley where a cabin sat beside a stream. Smoke rose from its chimney, and 3 horses were tied outside, the same 3 horses that had passed them the previous day. "Is Fletcher inside?" she whispered. Quinn shook his head. "I doubt it. Those men are still searching. See how they've got the place surrounded." He pointed to positions around the cabin where the 3 men were stationed. "They think he might return here." "Whose cabin is it?" "Hard to say. Might be a line shack for one of the big ranches, or a trapper's place." Quinn studied the scene carefully. but it means Fletcher has been here recently, probably spent the night." "So where is he now?" Tabitha asked. Quinn scanned the surrounding landscape. "If I were him, I'd head for the hills to the north. More cover, more places to hide." He pointed to a distant line of darker green against the horizon. "There's a dense forest up there, perfect for losing pursuers." They retreated to their horses, circling wide around the cabin to avoid being spotted by the gunmen. Quinn led them on a northeasterly course, explaining that they would cut across Fletcher's likely path rather than follow directly behind him. The terrain grew increasingly difficult as they ascended into the foothills. Pine trees replaced the open prairie, and the path narrowed, sometimes disappearing entirely. Quinn dismounted frequently to check for signs of passage, finding occasional evidence that someone had come this way recently: a broken branch, a hoofprint in soft earth, a discarded food wrapper. By late afternoon, they had reached the forest Quinn had pointed out earlier. The dense canopy of pines blocked much of the sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight beneath the trees. The air was cooler here, and the silence was profound, broken only by the occasional call of a bird or the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Quinn moved more cautiously now, leading his horse rather than riding. Tabitha followed his example, keeping close behind him. After about an hour, he suddenly stopped, raising his hand for silence. Ahead of them, barely visible through the trees, was a small clearing with a crude lean-to shelter. And sitting beside a tiny, smokeless fire was a familiar figure: Edmund Fletcher. Tabitha's heart leaped into her throat at the sight of him. Even from this distance, she recognized his posture, the set of his shoulders. He was alone, apparently unaware of their presence, heating something in a small tin over his meager fire. Quinn turned to Tabitha, pressing a finger to his lips before motioning for her to secure the horses. They tied them well back from the clearing. Then Quinn drew his revolver, checking it quickly before returning it to his holster. "Stay behind me," he whispered. "If anything goes wrong, get back to the horses and ride for Fort McPherson." Tabitha started to protest, but Quinn silenced her with a look. "I mean it, Tabitha. We don't know if he's armed or what he'll do when cornered." Reluctantly, she nodded her agreement. They moved silently through the trees, approaching the clearing from downwind. Fletcher was still focused on his meal, occasionally glancing nervously over his shoulder toward the south, the direction of the cabin they had passed earlier. When they were within 20 yards, Quinn stepped deliberately on a dry branch. The crack echoed through the clearing, causing Fletcher to leap to his feet, spinning around wildly. "Who's there?" he called, his voice high with fear. His hand moved toward his waist, where Tabitha could now see he had a small revolver tucked into his belt. "I wouldn't," Quinn said calmly, stepping into the clearing with his own weapon drawn. "Hands where I can see them, Fletcher." Edmund's eyes widened with recognition, then narrowed as he assessed the situation. Slowly, he raised his hands. "You're from Kearney," he said. "The rancher." "Quinn, isn't it?" "That's right," Quinn replied, moving closer. "And I'm not alone." Taking her cue, Tabitha stepped out from behind the trees, facing the man who had betrayed her trust so completely. Edmund's face paled. "Tabitha," he gasped, "what are you doing here?" "Recovering what you stole," she replied, surprised at how steady her voice sounded despite the tumult of emotions inside her. "From me and from everyone else in Kearney." Edmund's expression shifted, calculation replacing surprise. "Tabitha, darling, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I didn't steal anything. I was forced to leave town, threatened by men who wanted access to the bank's funds." Quinn snorted in disbelief. "Save your stories, Fletcher. We know what you did." "The money's not here anyway," Edmund said quickly, his eyes darting between them. "It's hidden. You'll never find it without me. "We're not looking for it without you," Quinn replied. "You're coming back to Kearney to face justice." Edmund laughed, a brittle sound. "Justice? In a frontier town with no proper court, I think not." His demeanor changed suddenly, becoming more confident. "Besides, you're too late. Those men at the cabin, they work for me." Quinn's expression didn't change, but Tabitha saw his grip tighten on his revolver. "You're lying." "Am I?" Edmund smirked. "How do you think I managed to get away with $20,000? I planned this for months." "Those men are my insurance policy." Tabitha stepped forward, anger overriding caution. "You're despicable, Edmund. All those people trusted you. I trusted you." Edmund's eyes fixed on her, his expression softening slightly. "Tabitha, come with me. We could have a good life together." "I always meant to include you in my plans." The offer was so absurd, so offensive that Tabitha could only stare at him in disbelief. Before she could respond, a new voice came from behind them. "Well, ain't this cozy?" Quinn spun around, keeping his gun trained on Fletcher. 3 men stood at the edge of the clearing, the same men they had been tracking, their weapons already drawn. "Told you they worked for me," Edmund said smugly. The lead gunman laughed. "We don't work for nobody but ourselves, fancy man." He spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "And we heard there was $20,000 ripe for the taking." Edmund's smug expression faltered. "There's been a misunderstanding. I hired you through my associate you didn't hire nobody," the gunman interrupted. "But thanks for confirming the amount." He gestured with his gun. "Now, where's the money?" The situation had deteriorated rapidly. Tabitha found herself standing between 2 armed parties, both willing to kill for the stolen money. Quinn had shifted his position slightly, moving to stand between her and the newcomers, but she could see the grim calculation in his eyes. They were outnumbered and outgunned. "Nobody needs to get hurt," Quinn said evenly. "The money belongs to the people of Kearney. It's going back there." "Not likely," the gunman replied. "Now drop your weapon or the lady gets a new hole in her pretty head." Quinn hesitated, then slowly bent to place his revolver on the ground. As he straightened, his eyes met Tabitha's briefly, conveying a silent message. "Be ready." "You too, banker," the gunman ordered Edmund. "Hand over that pea-shooter." Edmund reluctantly placed his small revolver on the ground. "The money's not here," he said quickly. "It's hidden. I can take you to it." "Then you'd better start walking," the gunman growled. What happened next unfolded so quickly that Tabitha barely had time to register it. As the gunman's attention fixed on Edmund, Quinn suddenly dove forward, rolling across the ground and coming up with his dropped revolver. 2 shots rang out almost simultaneously, Quinn's finding its mark in the lead gunman's shoulder, while the return fire went wide. "Run!" Quinn shouted to Tabitha, firing again as he sought cover behind a fallen log. Tabitha didn't hesitate. She bolted for the trees as gunfire erupted behind her. She heard Edmund shout something unintelligible, followed by more shots. Reaching the relative safety of the forest, she turned back. Unwilling to leave Quinn alone, from her vantage point, she could see Quinn exchanging fire with the remaining gunmen who had scattered for cover. Edmund was nowhere to be seen. He had apparently seized the opportunity to escape during the confusion. One of the gunmen cried out and fell, clutching his leg. The other, realizing he was now alone against Quinn, suddenly broke and ran, disappearing into the trees on the far side of the clearing. In the sudden silence that followed, Tabitha called out, "Patrick, are you hit?" "I'm fine," came his reply, though she could hear the strain in his voice. "Fletcher's running. North, toward the ridge. He has a saddlebag with him, must be the money." Tabitha emerged from the trees to find Quinn already on his feet, checking the fallen gunmen. One was unconscious, the other moaning and clutching his wounded leg. "They'll live," Quinn said grimly, retrieving some rope from his belt to secure them. "But Fletcher's getting away." "Not for long," Tabitha replied, already moving toward where they had left the horses. They mounted quickly and set off in pursuit, following the obvious trail Edmund had left in his panic. Unlike Quinn, the banker had no experience in covering his tracks, and his passage through the forest was marked by broken branches and disturbed undergrowth. The trail led them upward, toward a rocky ridge that marked the highest point in the immediate area. As they emerged from the tree line, they spotted Edmund scrambling up the rocky slope ahead of them, the heavy saddlebag slowing his progress. "Edmund," Tabitha called out. "Stop! There's nowhere to go." He glanced back, his face contorted with fear and anger. "Stay away from me," he shouted, continuing his desperate climb. Quinn and Tabitha dismounted, leaving their horses at the base of the ridge and pursuing on foot. The terrain was treacherous, loose rocks and steep inclines, making their progress slow and dangerous. Above them, Edmund had nearly reached the top, the saddlebag clutched tightly to his chest. "He's heading for the other side," Quinn observed. "There might be a trail down." They redoubled their efforts, climbing as quickly as safety allowed. Tabitha's hands were soon scraped and raw from the sharp rocks, but she ignored the pain, focused solely on catching the man who had betrayed her trust so completely. When they finally reached the summit, they found Edmund standing perilously close to the edge of a sheer drop on the far side. There was no trail down, only a vertical cliff face descending nearly 100 feet to jagged rocks below. "It's over, Fletcher," Quinn said, his voice calm despite his labored breathing. "There's no way out." Edmund clutched the saddlebag tighter, his eyes wild. "Stay back. I'll jump before I let you take me." "Don't be foolish," Tabitha said, taking a cautious step forward. "That's a fatal drop." "Maybe I deserve it," Edmund replied bitterly. "I've lost everything anyway." "Not everything," Tabitha countered. "Your life is worth more than stolen money." Edmund laughed harshly. "Easy for you to say. You have your respectable profession, your place in society. What do I have? A position at a backwater bank with no future, no prospects. So you decided to steal from people who trusted you?" Quinn asked. "People who worked hard for that money." "It was business," Edmund snapped. "Just business." "It was betrayal," Tabitha replied quietly. "Of the worst kind." Something in her tone seemed to reach him. Edmund's shoulders slumped slightly, and for a moment Tabitha thought he might surrender. Instead, he took a deliberate step backward, even closer to the edge. "Edmund, don't." Tabitha lunged forward instinctively. What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion. Edmund's foot slipped on the loose gravel at the cliff's edge. His arms windmilled frantically as he fought for balance, the heavy saddlebag pulling him backward. Tabitha reached for him, her fingers brushing his sleeve but finding no purchase. With a cry of terror, Edmund began to fall backward over the cliff edge. In that instant, Quinn surged forward with remarkable speed, diving across the ground and catching Edmund's arm just as he tipped over the precipice. The sudden jerk nearly pulled Quinn over as well, but he managed to brace himself against a rocky outcropping. "Help me." Quinn grunted, his muscles straining as he held Edmund's weight. Tabitha scrambled forward, grabbing Quinn's belt to add her weight as an anchor while he attempted to pull Edmund back up. But Edmund was panicking, thrashing wildly, still clutching the saddlebag with his free hand. "Drop the money," Quinn shouted at him. "I can't hold you with that weight." "No," Edmund cried. "It's all I have, your life or the money," Quinn growled through clenched teeth. "Choose." For a terrible moment, Edmund seemed to hesitate. Then, with a sob of defeat, he released the saddlebag. It plummeted downward, hitting the rocks below with a distant thud, and spilling its contents, bundles of cash scattering in the wind. With the reduced weight, Quinn was able to haul Edmund back up over the edge of the cliff. The three of them collapsed on the rocky ground, gasping for breath. Edmund lay curled in a fetal position, sobbing quietly. "The money," he kept repeating. "All that money." Quinn sat up, checking his shoulder where the strain had nearly dislocated it. "Your life's worth more than stolen cash, Fletcher. Remember that." Tabitha moved to examine Quinn's shoulder, her doctor's instincts taking over. "You'll have some impressive bruising, but nothing seems torn or broken," she said after a careful examination. "That was incredibly reckless, Patrick." He met her gaze steadily. "Couldn't let him fall. No matter what he's done." The simple statement, delivered without drama or expectation of praise, spoke volumes about Patrick Quinn's character. In that moment, Tabitha realized she was looking at a truly good man, one whose moral compass pointed true, even when facing someone who had caused harm. Edmund had stopped sobbing and was now sitting up, staring desolately at the cliff edge where the money had disappeared. "What happens now?" he asked dully. "Now we go back to Kearney," Quinn replied, getting to his feet. "You face what you've done." "The money's gone," Edmund said. "What's the point?" Tabitha stood as well, brushing dust from her clothes. "Justice isn't just about recovering what was stolen, Edmund. It's about accountability." Quinn was looking thoughtfully at the cliff edge. "Maybe not all the money's lost. Some of those bundles looked like they landed on a ledge about halfway down. With some rope and daylight, we might be able to recover some of it." Hope flickered across Edmund's face, quickly replaced by resignation. "Won't matter for me. I'll still hang." "That's not for us to decide," Quinn said, securing Edmund's wrists with a length of rope from his pocket. "But owning up to what you've done might count for something." They made their way carefully back down the ridge to where their horses waited. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the landscape. Quinn decided they would make camp at the base of the ridge for the night and attempt to recover whatever money they could at first light. That evening, as they sat around a small fire, Quinn had deemed it safe now that the immediate danger had passed. Edmund finally spoke about what had driven him to his desperate act. "I never meant to stay in Kearney," he admitted, staring into the flames. "It was supposed to be temporary, just long enough to establish myself before moving on to something bigger. But then the months passed, and I was still there, still just a small-town banker with grand dreams and no way to fulfill them." "So you decided to steal from the people who welcomed you?" Tabitha asked, still struggling to understand. Edmund looked at her, genuine regret in his eyes. "It wasn't about the people, Tabitha. It was never personal. I saw an opportunity and I took it." "It was personal to every person who lost their savings," Quinn pointed out. "To the widows who lost their support fund. To Dr. Ross here, who lost years of hard work." Edmund had no answer for that. After a moment of uncomfortable silence, he asked quietly, "Did you really care for me, Tabitha? Or was I just a suitable match, the educated banker for the lady doctor?" Tabitha considered the question carefully. "I thought I cared for you, Edmund. I admired your intelligence, your refinement. But now I wonder if I ever really knew you at all." Her gaze inadvertently drifted to Quinn, who was methodically checking his revolver by the firelight. He looked up, catching her eye briefly before returning to his task. Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of mutual respect that felt more genuine than anything she had shared with Edmund during their months of courtship. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Quinn was up early, fashioning a harness from their combined ropes. His plan was simple but dangerous. He would descend the cliff face to retrieve whatever money had landed on the visible ledges, while Tabitha and a secured Edmund would manage the ropes from above. "This is unnecessarily risky," Tabitha argued as Quinn tested the strength of his makeshift harness. $20,000 represents a lot of dreams in Kearney, he replied simply. Worth a little risk. The descent was harrowing to watch. Quinn moved with practiced skill down the sheer rock face. But even so, there were several heart-stopping moments when loose rocks gave way beneath his feet, or the rope jerked unexpectedly. Tabitha found herself holding her breath, her heart pounding with anxiety for this man she had known for less than a week, but had come to admire deeply. After what seemed like an eternity, Quinn called up that he had reached the main ledge where several bundles of money had landed. He secured them in a bag attached to a separate line, which Tabitha and Edmund carefully hauled up. The recovery operation took most of the morning. By noon, Quinn had retrieved approximately half of the stolen money, just over $10,000. The rest had either been carried away by the wind or had fallen to inaccessible places far below. "It's better than nothing," Quinn said as they counted the recovered funds. "Enough to make a difference back in Kearney." Edmund watched the counting with a hollow expression. "I suppose this means my sentence might be lighter." "That's for a judge to decide," Quinn replied, though his tone had lost some of its earlier harshness. There was something almost pitying in the way he regarded the fallen banker, now a man who had risked everything for wealth and ended up with nothing. They began the journey back to Kearney that afternoon, taking a more direct route than their outbound journey. Quinn had bound Edmund's hands, but allowed him to ride his own horse. The two gunmen they had left behind were gone when they returned to the clearing, presumably helped away by their companion who had fled. The return journey took 3 days, during which an uneasy camaraderie developed among the three travelers. Edmund, perhaps recognizing the inevitability of his situation, became almost cooperative, pointing out shortcuts and answering Quinn's questions about his escape route honestly. For Tabitha, the journey was a time of reflection. She found herself increasingly drawn to Patrick Quinn, his quiet strength, his unfailing moral certainty, his gentle consideration despite the harsh circumstances. He was nothing like the sophisticated, polished Edmund Fletcher she had thought she wanted. Instead, he was something far more valuable, a man of genuine character. On the evening of the 3rd day, as they camped within a few hours' ride of Kearney, Quinn finally asked the question that had clearly been on his mind. "What will you do now, Tabitha, after we return?" She looked up from the small fire they had built. "Rebuild, I suppose." "Half the money is better than none. It will take longer to expand my practice, but it's still possible," Quinn nodded, poking at the fire with a stick. "Kearney's lucky to have you. Not many frontier towns get a doctor of your caliber. Are you planning to stay?" she asked, suddenly realizing how much she wanted him to. Quinn was quiet for a moment. "My ranch needs attention. Been gone too long already," he glanced at her. "But Kearney's not far, close enough for visits." Something warm unfurled in Tabitha's chest at his words. "I'd like that," she said softly, from his place on the other side of the fire. Edmund watched this exchange with a knowing expression, but said nothing. Their arrival in Kearney the next day caused quite a stir. Word spread quickly, and by the time they reached the main street, a crowd had gathered. Marshal Wilkins pushed through the throng, his expression a mix of surprise and grudging respect when he saw Edmund bound, and the recovered money secure in Quinn's saddlebags. "Well, I'll be damned," the marshal said, shaking his head in amazement. "You actually did it." Quinn dismounted, handing Edmund over to the marshal's custody. "Half the money," he corrected. "The rest is gone, but it's something." The crowd pressed closer, eager for details. Tabitha found herself surrounded by well-wishers and curious townspeople, all asking questions about their journey and the recovery of the stolen funds. She answered as best she could, but her eyes kept straying to Quinn, who was quietly explaining the situation to the marshal. Over the next few days, the recovered money was carefully distributed according to the bank's ledgers, with depositors receiving roughly half of what they had lost. It wasn't a complete restoration, but for many, it was enough to continue their lives and businesses without complete ruin. Edmund was held in the town jail awaiting the circuit judge, who was due in 2 weeks' time. The charges against him were serious theft, fraud, assault on the night guard, but his cooperation in the recovery effort and Quinn's testimony that he had tried to save Edmund's life at the cliff edge would likely spare him from the harshest penalties. Tabitha visited him once in his cell, seeking closure more than anything else. She found him subdued, resigned to his fate. "I am sorry, Tabitha," he said sincerely, "not just for taking your money, but for betraying your trust. You deserved better." "Yes," she agreed simply. "I did." As she turned to leave, Edmund called after her, "Quinn's a good man, better than I could ever be." Tabitha paused but did not turn around. "Yes," she said again, "he is." She left the jail with a lighter heart, feeling as though a chapter in her life had closed. The betrayal still stung, but its power over her was fading. She had survived, recovered half her savings, and in the process, discovered something far more valuable. Patrick Quinn had returned to his ranch the day after their arrival in Kearney, citing neglected work and responsibilities. He had departed with a promise to return soon, but as days passed with no sign of him, Tabitha began to wonder if the connection she had felt between them had been one-sided. A week after their return, Tabitha was working late in her small clinic when a knock came at the door. Opening it, she found Quinn standing there, hat in hand, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt that strained slightly across his broad shoulders. "Patrick," she said, unable to hide her pleasure at seeing him. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about us here in town." "Not likely," he replied, a smile warming his usually serious features. "Ranch needed attention, and I needed time to think." "About what?" she asked, inviting him inside with a gesture. Quinn stepped through the doorway, his tall frame seeming to fill the small waiting room of her clinic. "About what happens next," he said simply. Tabitha's heart quickened. "And have you reached any conclusions?" Quinn looked around the clinic at the neat shelves of medicines, the clean examination table, the carefully organized instruments. "You've built something important here," he said. "Something that matters." "Yes," she agreed. "I have. My ranch is 10 miles north," Quinn continued. "Good land, good water. Been thinking about expanding, maybe breeding horses instead of just raising them." Tabitha waited, sensing there was more to this conversation than ranch planning. Quinn finally met her eyes directly. "Thing is, I find myself riding into town more often than necessary lately, finding excuses to come to Kearney, and I think you know why." "Perhaps you should tell me anyway," Tabitha suggested softly, her pulse racing. Quinn took a step closer to her. "Those days on the trail tracking Fletcher, I saw something I've been looking for a long time: courage, intelligence, a heart that doesn't quit." His voice grew quieter. "A woman I could admire, could love given time." The word love hung in the air between them, both a question and a possibility. "That's quite a declaration, Mr. Quinn," Tabitha said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the emotion swelling within her. "Especially from a man of few words." "Been saving them up," he replied with a slight smile. "Figured this was worth using a few extra." Tabitha closed the distance between them, looking up into his face, the face that had become dear to her in such a short time. "I find myself thinking of those days on the trail as well. Of a man who risked his life to save someone who had wronged him, who kept his promises, who sees me as I am, not as society says I should be." Quinn's hand came up to gently touch her cheek. Is that a favorable assessment, Dr. Ross? Highly favorable, Mr. Quinn, she replied, leaning slightly into his touch. In fact, I would be very interested in continuing our association. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened into something more urgent, more honest than any Tabitha had experienced before. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I should warn you," he said quietly. "I'm not a wealthy man, just a rancher with some land and dreams that need tending." "I'm not interested in wealth," Tabitha replied. "I've seen what the pursuit of it can do to a person's character." She smiled up at him. "Besides, I have my own profession. Between your ranch and my practice, we'd manage quite well, I think." Quinn's eyebrows rose slightly. "Are we discussing a partnership, Dr. Ross?" "I believe we are, Mr. Quinn," she replied. "Though perhaps we should take some time to be certain, court properly, as they say." Quinn smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "I'd like that, though I should warn you I'm not much for fancy restaurants or social gatherings." Tabitha laughed. "After sleeping under the stars with you for nearly a week, I think I understand your preferences quite well." Over the following months, Kearney witnessed the careful, deliberate courtship of Dr. Tabitha Ross by rancher Patrick Quinn. He would ride into town several times a week, sometimes with legitimate business, sometimes with transparent excuses that fooled no one. She began making house calls in the direction of his ranch with increasing frequency. They were an unlikely pair, the educated Eastern physician and the taciturn former Texas Ranger turned rancher, but somehow they fit. His straightforward nature complemented her analytical mind. Her compassion softened his harder edges. And at the core, they shared the same values: honesty, hard work, and a deep respect for each other's independence. Edmund Fletcher was sentenced to 5 years in the territorial prison, for his crimes a lighter sentence than many had expected, largely due to Quinn's testimony about his cooperation and the partial recovery of the funds. When he was led away to serve his time, Tabitha watched not with anger, but with something closer to pity for a man whose ambition had cost him everything that truly mattered. 6 months after their return to Kearney, Patrick proposed to Tabitha on a hilltop overlooking both the town and his ranch in the distance. His words were simple, but heartfelt, a promise of partnership, respect, and growing love. Her acceptance was equally straightforward, sealed with a kiss as the sun set over the Nebraska landscape they both now called home. Their wedding took place the following spring, a surprisingly well-attended affair that brought together the townspeople of Kearney and the scattered ranching families of the surrounding countryside. Tabitha wore a practical but beautiful blue dress rather than traditional white, a choice that raised a few eyebrows, but surprised no one who knew her independent spirit. After the ceremony, Quinn surprised his new wife with an unexpected wedding gift, the deed to a building on Kearney's Main Street, perfect for establishing the larger medical practice she had been saving for. He had purchased it with money from selling part of his herd, insisting that her dream was now his as well. "But your ranch," she protested. "Your expansion plans can wait," he finished for her. "Some dreams are worth the delay." Their first year of marriage brought adjustments for both of them. Quinn had lived alone for so long that sharing his home and his life required conscious effort. Tabitha, fiercely independent, had to learn the art of compromise without surrendering her identity. But beneath these surface challenges, they found a deep contentment in their union, a partnership of equals built on mutual respect and growing affection. Tabitha continued her medical practice, now operating from the larger building in town, while Quinn managed his ranch. They divided their time between her home in Kearney and his ranch house, gradually blending their separate lives into a shared one. Quinn hired additional hands for the ranch, allowing him more flexibility to support Tabitha's work when needed. Their different skills complemented each other perfectly. When a difficult birth required Tabitha to stay with a patient for 2 days straight, Quinn managed her other patients' basic needs without complaint. When a blizzard threatened Quinn's herd, Tabitha rode out with him to help bring the cattle to shelter, her small but capable hands working alongside his larger ones. As their second anniversary approached, Tabitha shared news that would change their lives once again. She was expecting their first child. Quinn's reaction was everything she had hoped for, a moment of stunned silence, followed by a joy so profound it transformed his usually composed features. "A baby," he said in wonder, his hand gently covering hers where it rested on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you happy?" she asked, though his expression had already answered her question. "More than I thought possible," he replied, gathering her carefully into his arms. "You've given me everything I never knew I wanted." Tabitha Quinn. Their son, James Thomas Quinn, was born on a cold winter night with his father pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door while Kearney's new doctor, recruited by Tabitha herself, attended the birth. When Quinn was finally allowed inside, the sight of his wife, tired but triumphant, holding their newborn son left him speechless with emotion. "He has your eyes," Tabitha observed, smiling up at her husband as he gently took the infant in his arms. "And hopefully your patience rather than my stubbornness." "A little stubbornness isn't a bad thing," Quinn replied, looking down at his son with undisguised wonder. "Got us here, didn't it?" As young James grew, so did the Quinn family's integration into the fabric of Kearney. Tabitha's medical practice flourished, becoming a center of health care for the region. Quinn's ranch expanded successfully, his breeding program producing horses sought after throughout the territory. 2 years after James's birth, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth Sarah Quinn, completing their family. The ranch house was expanded to accommodate their growing household, with a special room added for Tabitha's medical library and research. Sometimes, during quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Tabitha would find Quinn looking at her with an expression of quiet amazement. "What?" she would ask, smiling under his gaze. "Just thinking about how different things might have been," he would reply. "If Fletcher hadn't stolen that money, if we hadn't gone after him together. Do you regret it?" she would tease, knowing the answer. "Not for a second," he always answered, pulling her close. "Best thing that thief ever did was bringing you into my life." As the years passed, the story of how they met became family legend, how a banker's betrayal had led to an unexpected journey, and how that journey had forged a bond stronger than either of them could have imagined. They told their children modified versions as they grew, emphasizing the importance of trust, perseverance, and the unexpected ways life could lead you to where you were meant to be. Edmund Fletcher was eventually released from prison after serving his full sentence. He left Nebraska immediately, reportedly heading west to California. Tabitha sometimes wondered what became of him, hoping that he had found a more honest path. Quinn was less sentimental, but acknowledged that without Fletcher's betrayal, their paths might never have crossed. By the turn of the century, Patrick and Tabitha Quinn were fixtures in Kearney, respected, admired, and deeply content with the life they had built together. Their children were growing into fine young adults, their ventures continued to prosper, and their partnership remained as strong as it had been on those days trekking through the wilderness. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Quinn surprised Tabitha with a journey back to the ridge where they had recovered the stolen money, the place where Though neither had recognized it at the time, their future together had begun to take shape. Standing on that high point, overlooking the vastly changed landscape of a Nebraska now crisscrossed by railways and telegraph lines, they reflected on how far they had come. "Worth every step of the journey," Quinn said, his arm around her waist as they watched the sunset. "Every hardship, every challenge, even tracking a thief across 3 counties?" Tabitha asked, leaning into his embrace. Quinn smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling with the years of happiness they had shared. "Especially that part, best tracking I ever did." "And to think," Tabitha mused, "it all started with a gunshot at dawn and a bank robbery." "No," Quinn corrected gently. "It started with a courageous woman who refused to accept that her future had been stolen. I just helped get it back." Tabitha turned in his arms to face him, seeing in his weathered features the same steady strength that had first drawn her to him all those years ago. "You gave me much more than that, Patrick Quinn. You gave me a whole new future, one better than anything I could have planned." As the sun slipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land they both loved, Patrick and Tabitha Quinn shared a kiss that held 2 decades of memories, and the promise of many more to come, all because a thief had stolen her savings, and a cowboy had helped her track him down, recovering far more than just the stolen money in the process.